Welcome to the 61st week of 61 Minutes. Today we will be covering the case of Gibbons versus Ogden. We hope you enjoy.
Robert Livingston and Robert Fulton were both granted monopolies by the New York State to operate all the waterways of the state. So when Mr. Aaron Ogden first heard of this, he was very angry and he tried to defy them as much as possible. But soon enough, him and Thomas Gibbons joined their business and were reaping benefits off of them as well. However, 3 years into their business, Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Ogden had a falling out, and Mr. Gibbons went his own way. Several years later, when Mr. Gibbons tried to operate a steamboat through the Hudson River, Mr. Ogden refused to let him go because he was still in charge of all the waterways of New York. So as a result, Mr. Thomas Gibbons decided to file this case to the Supreme Court, where the matters are discussed in the following video.
Thomas Gibbons appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that the monopoly that was imposed by Ogden conflicted with federal laws, specifically Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, that gave Congress the power to regulate commerce.
Webster, you asserted that Gibson's federal license granted him the right to navigate freely in all the waters of the U.S., and therefore the New York law prohibiting Gibson from navigating was unconstitutional. So how did this statement regard to your argument that states don't have the power to regulate interstate trade?
Congress had exclusive national power over interstate commerce according to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and that to argue otherwise would result in confusing and contradicting local regulatory policies.
How were you able to so strongly convince the court of your standings?
The court was urged to take a broad view of the word commerce, which would subject passengers on interstate transport as well as other tangible items of commerce to federal regulation. Presenters argued that the federal coasting license overrides any New York regulations because the commerce clauses give the federal government exclusive control over interstate commerce.
So how did you appeal to the Supreme Court considering the allegations against you?
Argued that in New York, the regulation conflicted with federal law, I had the right to operate on the route, pursuant to the 1793 Act of Congress, Regulatory Coastal Commerce. The clause states that the United States Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes.
So the Commerce Clause gives the U.S. Congress power to regulate commerce within foreign nations and states. How does this clause lend to the favor of your argument?
It was seen that I was given my license by the federal government, and the court acknowledged that the Constitution did not expressly grant Congress the power to regulate navigation on interstate waterways. But Marshall pointed out that all the states were connected by waterways, and commerce would be impossible without navigating them. Therefore, the power to regulate transporting goods on waterways was necessary and proper for Congress to carry out its power to regulate.
Aaron Ogden first filed a complaint in the Court of Chancery of New York asking the court to restrain Gibbons from operating on his waters. Then, after Daniel Webster filed an appeal to the Supreme Court, Thomas Emmett, Ogden's attorney, argued that states should have concurrent power with Congress on matters concerning interstate commerce.
We know that Gibson filed a lawsuit against you for not permitting him access to New York waterways. What were your issues with Gibson?
I filed a complaint in the Court of Chancery of New York asking the court to restrain Thomas Gibbons from operating on my regulated water. The state had given me exclusive rights to on the route.
So, being a former New Jersey governor and being an anti-federalist, you oppose the creation of a strong U.S. federal government. How did being an anti-federalist contribute to your argument?
I argued that states should have all the power to regulate trade and that it shouldn't be controlled by the government since it deals directly with the states. States often pass laws on issues regarding interstate matters and that states should have fully concurrent power with Congress no matters concurring interstate commerce.
With the use of the Commerce Clause, how are you able to rebuttal this strong-backed argument?
I argued it was limited in scope because the decision should be interpreted to say that navigation only pertained to the Federal Commerce Clause because it was necessary to business as it allowed for the interstate transportation and goods.
John Marshall, a huge proponent of the Commerce Clause, was the Chief Justice at the time of the trial.
The Commerce Clause listed in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, states that the U.S. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states and with the Indian tribes. Why did you choose the Commerce Clause to resolve the issues between Gibson and Ogden?
I thought that the Commerce Clause accurately included the movement of people and navigation, as well as the exchange of products, ideas, and communication. So the inclusion of movement and of navigation relates to the men's ships.
In general, you oppose the states' rights doctrines, and there are many who criticize you for this and also are against the increasing power of the Supreme Court. How did your Federalist views play a role in your decision-making in your ruling for Gibson?
Since I have such strong Federalist views, I believe the Constitution gives power to regulate commerce among the several states, including New York. The states should not hold power over the central government. That's why Gibbons' license is more accurate, because his is from the government and not the states.
Ogden versus Gibbons, case of 1824, is significant because it reinforces the power of the Constitution. Before this case, it was determined that the federal government only had power in interstate commerce. John Marshall, adding it to the definition of the Commerce Clause, now gave the federal government more power than the states in the aspect of trading. Congress determined this by saying that states could not regulate interstate trade and that all power was now within the hands of the federal government, now making it equal for all states. Through John Marshall's infamous decision in the Gibbons versus Ogden case, many people antagonized him because they felt that he ruled Gibbons win through his Federalist views. However, in all actuality, all of the Supreme Court judges decided unanimously in the decision, making it 6-0. As a result of the Gibbons versus Ogden case, John Marshall's ruling now made it to where state licensed monopolies on waterways were now eliminated, and now that business competition was encouraged. Marshall's court's interpretation of this case settled the precedent for all future issues applying to this in railways, airplanes, pipelines, television stations, and even racial segregation. John Marshall's ruling was again brought up in 1837 with Chief Changy in the Charles Bridge versus Warren Bridge case. However, his ruling now eliminated state monopolies altogether.
Thank you so much for tuning in to week 61 of 61 Minutes. We will be looking forward to seeing you next week, the 62nd week of our show, 62 Minutes. Thank you so much and have a great night.